And good morning. This is Greg Yost here with the North Carolina Alliance to protect our people and the places we live. We're live this morning in Raleigh at the Department of Environmental Quality. It still says Diener, but they changed the name. APPPL is one of many groups and lots of people in North Carolina fighting the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Our group is here this morning to tell DEQ they need to revoke the permit that they've issued for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So let's go in and see what happens.
We are here this morning. We are here because we are residents of North Carolina who have come to DEQ today because there's an environmental emergency going on in the country as a whole and in North Carolina in particular. As Hurricanes Matthew, Florence, and Michael made clear, and the wildfires in California made clear, climate change threatens North Carolina and the whole planet. Yet DEQ has permitted the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, whose greenhouse gas emissions may push the climate beyond the tipping point of catastrophic climate change. And catastrophic climate change would make Florence, Michael, Matthew look like a normal story. So we are, and I have children,
I've got children too. But before you continue, listen, I know you guys have a permit to do this today. I'm not here to take any friends on anything. You guys can do what you need to do, and I understand. But you can't impede the governmental business that happens here. It still needs to occur. So we can't do this in front of the desk. We need to do it on the sidewalk.
We will stand over here. We residents of North Carolina have used all kinds of legitimate channels and behaved ourselves very well up until now. We've gone to hearings, we've written letters, we've had meetings. Tom and Kay have met with Commissioner Reagan multiple times, and nothing's happened. We clearly have not been heard on the climate change issues and on lots of other issues regarding especially the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And DEQ gave a permit for that pipeline to be built. And Governor Cooper has said in a WRAL interview about 3 weeks ago that Cooper played no role in that, and DEQ issued the permit on its own. Now, we don't think Cooper's being honest about that, but in any case. So we have gone through all the legitimate channels at DEQ hearings. We're given 3 minutes, each of us, and most of us in here participated in the DEQ hearings. We were given 3 minutes to express why we did not think that the Atlantic Coast Pipeline was a good idea. At the same time, the CEO of Duke, Lynn Good, the CEO of Dominion, Tom Farrell, had more than one private meeting with Governor Cooper. Representatives of the frack gas industry had private meetings with Governor Cooper, and we're given 3 minutes at these public hearings at night. The whole process has been so stacked against us, and it's still so stacked against us, that we feel like we've got to go outside now of the legitimate channels that have been set up for us, because those channels aren't working. So we are here today to make that very clear. Now, Governor Cooper, bless his heart, has issued the Executive Order 80. Executive Order 80 is a program whereby the state of North Carolina will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Lynn, good morning. How are you?
Hey, I see some faces on that.
How are you doing? And we're here because we are fed up with the fact that DEQ has not heard our concerns, and the Governor Cooper has not heard our concerns about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the greenhouse gas emissions.
Let's just sit down and chat.
No, we're going to do it right here, because we have gone through every legitimate channel. We have gone to hearings, we've written letters. Kay and Tom have met with Governor Reagan Commissioner Reagan.
Secretary Reagan, yeah.
Yes, and
I've seen you quite a few times too.
Right. So we have tried all our legitimate channels for expressing our opinions about this. We have not been heard. Clearly, we have not been heard. Now, Governor Cooper has issued Executive Order 80, which is headed in the right direction. But you know, if that is implemented, and we hope it is, greenhouse gas emissions in North Carolina will be reduced reduced by about 6 or 7 million tons of greenhouse gases a year. Now that's significant and could make a difference. But do you know how many millions of tons of greenhouse gases will be emitted if the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is built? Somewhere around, and I've got the figure, 68 million tons. In other words, more than 10 times as much greenhouse gas emissions will come from the Atlantic Coast Pipeline if it's built than will be saved by Governor Cooper's EO80. So EO80 is a smokescreen. One farmer from Nash County who has testified and so on has said, EO80 is like putting lipstick on a pig. Now that's a kind of funny way of saying something, but I think it's very, very clear that EO80 can be looked at as a smokescreen for the permitting of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. We cannot have smokescreens. I have children, I have grandchildren. Even though I look really young, have great-grandchildren. I am really, really scared what this planet may look like by the time my great-grandchild gets to be my age in like the year 2100. I just don't know, will this planet be livable for my great-granddaughter Evie and my other grandchildren, you know? So we are here today because...
To see Secretary Reagan, too.
Our
You said you haven't been hurt so far.
families are friendly. We have not been hurt. I don't know that we've been hurt.
Well, and I know this one, I don't know if I can hear you, so I'm begging for it.
Hi. Nice to meet you. I would like to let these people talk because we have a real, for us this is a life or death matter, you know, and for our families this is a life or death matter. But it doesn't look that it's that way for Secretary Reagan or for Governor Cooper. And, well, they take it seriously, but the pipeline still has a permit. The permit needs to be revoked. We have talked to you guys repeatedly. We have talked to the governor. We've sat in the governor's office. What guarantee do we have that we will be heard? You know?
Please, I just want to sit down and talk with you. Is that okay?
Well, if I knew we were going to be heard, let me ask the group, what should we do?
I think that the commitment of the group is...
Hi, I'm Megan. I don't think we've met.
My name is Kay Regal.
Hi, Kay.
Good to meet you.
I'm John Hyden. We met last night.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
So that you know,
we really appreciate you coming down and appreciate your role in public affairs. We really do and acknowledge that. But we really are intentional about talking to Secretary Reagan himself or his deputy. So thank you for understanding.
Okay.
So could you please?
I'm going to go back upstairs. If y'all want to sit down, I'll come back down in just a minute. Is that okay?
Sounds good. We'll
Because
stay
a lot of our
until-
senior staff are in their early Friday meeting.
Okay.
Let me go see what I can
Eddie,
do.
alert them and we'll just stand here. Sure appreciate it. If
Okay,
you could
well,
get the word.
and we're comfortable here. Our restrooms are right behind the elevator if you need anything.
Yeah, if you could go
I'll be
talk to
back in
them.
just a minute, and if y'all need something in the meantime, Audrey is lovely over here and super helpful. She let me know you were here.
Okay, thank you.
Make
for-
yourself at home.
Thank
I'll be
you for-
back in just a minute.
Okay. Thank
Are y'all on Facebook Live or are you doing Instagram?
Facebook.
Okay, thank you.
and here's a flyer and a press release. So if you would like to distribute these to various people, thank you very much.
I'll be back in just a minute.
Appreciate your patience.
I feel like I get the same loading about
How are you?
once a year.
I know, right? How are you doing? You look good.
No, sir, I know that the secretary's
But there's no reaction to them. I step out my front door each morning and I see this cancer policy policy, and you're telling them that they're looking at her. Well,
they are looking at it. I
the
remember because it was your
DEQ's
granddaddy's tree
the
that you shared with me.
DEQ's actions with Gen X is not the best track record in the world. 5, 10, 15 years from now, this is going to be our next Gen X. Are we going to be facing the same type of reaction to that people are with Gen X? People are dying of cancer. This pipeline goes in the ground. It's going to be your grandchildren that's going to be suffering from the cancers it's coming from.
Let me go upstairs. Let me see who of our senior staff is around. I'll be able to talk. Like I said, y'all make yourself comfortable. You know that I'll be back in just a few minutes. Talk to you in just a minute, okay?
And you probably know too about $1 million in order to get them to not oppose the pipeline. You know, that's what we're up against. We're up against these $1 million, what do you want to call it? Bribes that the DEQ uses. And what do we got? I could give $10 to you to try to persuade you, and I won't do that.
Well, thank you, because that's against, and although $10 is a lot of money.
But they threw around $1 million here and $1 million there, and $10,000 gifts here, isn't it? And so we don't get hurt. And Governor Cooper gets a $57 million mitigation fund, you know, which is great to mitigate this, but you know,
Stopping it.
all we have is our horses and our bodies. That's why
Can we
we're.
take your voice of yours?
Thank you.
Back in just a few minutes. Please do stay warm though, because it is cold out there. Those doors are
That's
direct.
why we're here. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
What? Just sorry. What you said?
So once again, this is Greg Yost with NC Apple. We're in the lobby of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, here to bring a message to them about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, telling them to revoke the permit that they've issued for the pipeline. For those who don't know, right now construction along the pipeline route has stopped in all 3 states: West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina. In Virginia especially, the pipeline has run into a lot of roadblocks at the Fourth Circuit Court level. And we think this is a great time to go beyond a stoppage and to stop the project entirely. And that's our message to Governor Cooper and Secretary Regan.
It's hard to understand when they say they're taking into consideration the Atlantic Coast Pipeline keep on going. That's like telling a child, you better stop, I'm going to spank you. Yeah, let's keep on doing this.
Really?
Did you finish your statements?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I didn't read it verbatim, but I said virtually. I think I said everything I wanted
They
to
have
say.
everything they need to revoke the permit. And I think
Okay,
that
there we
we
go.
can push that.
They
They have the information, they have the lies, they have the misinformation that they've given, and there's no reason not to revoke it at this point.
or at a minimum suspend it too. They could say, well, Dominion and Duke did not answer all, which is true. All the questions which DEQ posted in the last fall, you know. But then whatever happened, all these backroom deals got made, and so probably Reagan was told issue the permit. We'll deal with the fallout later. So.
But things have changed since that time. There's a lot of
Yeah,
new
a lot of
New
information.
information, of
Well,
course.
So that never should have been issued, but now there's total grounds for revoking it or suspending it at the bare minimum. It needs to be stopped.
And Duke even has a way of pulling out because their stock is falling because the cost of the pipeline is going up. They're losing backwards. The Duke stock has failed just this week, went down because of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline.
And as far as the misrepresentation all along, concerning the new evidence that's come out, all along the plan was to get the gas shipped overseas. Even U.S. Senator Burr has acknowledged that the plan was really to ship gas to China,
And
which is an
Trump-
outrage.
Remember Trump a year ago or so was in China and made like the deal. There was a deal that never got formalized, I think, but China was going to give something like $225 billion for the development of fossil fuels in West Virginia. Now, the specifics of that were like everything else Trump does, really ambiguous. But on the other hand, it was really alarming. I mean, one is that's a huge amount of money for China to be investing in the United States, and two, that it would be for the development of fossil fuels. But that, at the time, I said to myself, that's a real clear indication, not absolute proof, but a real clear indication that West Virginia gas, which is what the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is going to be carrying, West Virginia gas is going to go to Beijing, Shanghai, and
one thing to keep in mind is that the price that people around the world pay for this is much higher than we pay here. So they're going to start jacking up our prices to basically make as much money off of us as they're going to be able to make when they export it. And the other thing to keep in mind is that as we're all waking up to the dangers of climate change, we are going to be switching to renewables. And we're going to have empty pipelines in 15 years, and there's no risk to these companies because they're getting the rate they used to pay, for the construction of these. And so we're the ones that will be holding the bag.
Kathy, can you talk more about that? What's the cost currently of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and what portion of that will ratepayers bear?
Well, my understanding is the ratepayers are paying for the entire project, and whether that project, and these pipelines are built to last decades. So as we get into the 2020s and the 2030s, and we become more and more aware of the incredible danger that we're sending out into the atmosphere, and that we're going to start switching much more aggressively to renewables, we're going to have these empty pipelines that cost billions of dollars. And we're still going to be stuck paying the bills. We may not be using frack gas at that point, but we're still going to be paying for frack gas because all of this infrastructure was built to support an industry that's dying. And the utility industry is really it's been kind of stuck in the same place for a century. So, innovation is difficult in general, but in this particular industry, it's really tough. And so it's important that DEQ and state governments start really thinking about what's going to be happening in 10 years, what's going to be happening in 20 years. We're not planning for that right now.
That's right.
That brings up a good point, because you talk about what's going to happen. Maryland and Florida their governors have banned fracking in their state. So if fracking is falling by the wayside, what's this pipeline going 900 feet from my house going to be transported? We deserve to know. It's not needed. It needs to be stopped. Not delayed, stopped.
And the climate crisis is going on now, not 20 years from now. So this is the time to stop taking fossil fuels out of the ground, stop new extraction, and stop new infrastructure. We've got to deal with the fact that the climate's unraveling and quit new infrastructure. This is the time to stop pipelines, to stop new gas-fired power plants, and to put an end to fossil fuels. We've got to stop them now.
And John, this pipeline's going to be transporting fracked gas. It's not an oil pipeline. It's bringing fracked gas from West Virginia. Could you talk a little bit about methane's impact on the climate and why methane is an especially potent greenhouse gas?
Yeah, it's about 86 times worse for the next 20 years, which are critical in terms of our climate, than CO2. And it's devastating to have that much destruction of the climate when our governor is saying that we need to stop and protect the climate and stop the CO2, but he says absolutely nothing about something that's 86 times worse. So for every 1 million tons of CO2 that the governor stops, he should be stopping the 86 million tons that will be coming from methane. It's just ridiculous to focus on the CO2 when in the short run, in the next 20 years, it's 86 times worse for every pound of methane that's released.
That's right. So CO2 is the gas that gets all the attention. It's the one that we've heard about in terms of global warming potential, but there are a lot of other gases, including just plain old water vapor, that trap heat as well. Methane, which is what this pipeline would transport, it leaks at the wellhead, it leaks through pipelines. It's very hard to keep contained. It leaks during transport, it leaks a little bit at burning. This gas would be, probably a sizable amount of it would be liquefied and sent overseas from a repurposed natural gas export facility at Elba Island, Georgia. And once it gets into other countries' infrastructure, it's going to leak. So all in all, this is kind of a death knell for the climate. If we have any hope of keeping our planets warming under 2 degrees Celsius, that presupposes that we're going to stop doing really stupid stuff like building more infrastructure for fracked gas.
It also leaks in our homes. And as we've seen, the explosion in Massachusetts, that lots of people still don't have access to their homes because there's still no power after months, and the incredible explosions that have happened. This propaganda line of clean, safe, natural gas, it's a total lie. It's quite dangerous, it's quite dirty, and it's fracked.
Yeah.
If you look at the recommendations of the gas companies who sell gas to families and to people's homes, one of the first things it says in this, and this really alarmed me when I saw it, and really it was sort of funny on one level, but deadly serious on another. It says, if you smell gas, don't touch a light switch, don't make a phone call, get out of your house, go elsewhere, and then make the phone call. Because you might, by switching a switch, create a spark that would ignite an explosion. So that's how deadly gas is, and even they are admitting it. And they have to admit it by law, I guess. The propaganda about the pipeline is that it's safe. But one other point I wanted to make is that the Governor Hogan of Virginia, of Maryland, who is a Republican governor and not known for his liberalism generally. One is, as somebody mentioned, he banned fracking in Maryland, which is good. But recently, he also voted as part of the Public Utilities Commission to refuse a permit to a pipeline in Maryland. This was just in the last week or two. So there is precedent for governors standing up to the fossil fuel interest, to the frack gas interest, and stopping these pipelines. So if Republican governor of Maryland can do that, certainly our liberal Democratic Governor Cooper and Secretary Reagan of Department of Environmental Quality can revoke the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and find legal grounds to stand on.
Yeah, it's never too late to admit that you've made a mistake, and North Carolina has been making a lot of mistakes with regard to the pipeline. While we're waiting, continue to wait for DEQ to speak with us.
Friday meeting.
Oh.
Unfortunately, senior staff are finishing their conversations after their usual Friday meeting. I'm not going to be able to put anybody down today. So what I want you to do, shoot me a note. Let's set up a meeting like we did before when you met with Secretary Reagan. You came at least once. I know you were able to come. And let's set up a meeting. Well, you said you want to be heard, so I want to make sure you have time for a dialogue.
It's to the point where we've done that. It's like when you did the postcards, we did the letters, we did the meetings.
I understand.
But you continuously seeing the pipeline get their way.
Well, but you have some new things that you had put in your message that you gave me.
These are old pictures,
and you
the
wanted
reason
to
it's big is because I was afraid Secretary Reagan couldn't see it.
Well, and you've got some new things you want to talk about in EO 80. I think it's worthwhile to set up a meeting.
The new is that we are tired simply of talking to you guys and nothing happening. We have a permit. We have a DEQ has permitted a pipeline which is as dangerous as anything being built in the world right now.
I understand, but I would like to set up a time for you to talk to some of our leaders.
He travels 3 hours from Fayetteville to get here.
Yes, sir.
Greg and I came 5 hours from Asheville. You know, that's how important this is.
I wish I could set up an impromptu meeting right now, but I just can't make it.
No, I understand that, but what, you know, and I've never been a diplomat, but when diplomats and unions and others set up meetings to negotiate, there are some ground rules for the negotiation. I'd be very happy to come back here anytime if we had some ground rules that made it very clear that DEQ is going to do something about this. Right now, DEQ is doing nothing about it that we know of.
Let's set up a
meetings. The governor has just released all those records, right?
Yes, sir, and DEQ has as well, and they're all available.
But what I'm getting at, there's points in there where they have meetings with Tom Farrell, they have meetings with Lynn Good, they have meetings. We spent a whole, not I, but this group and many more spent a whole day at the governor's office just to speak to the governor. While they were there to speak to the governor, he couldn't come down and speak to him, but he was in meetings with Tom Farrell.
I can't speak to the governor's schedule, but I want to try and help y'all set up some.
The DEQ is supposed to protect us.
Yes, sir, and I realize when you come in an impromptu way, you can't just slide you right in.
Yes, I do have to say something about that. Can you possibly imagine how people feel, how all of us here might feel, that one of the senior staff does not have the professional courtesy to come down and to at least say hello and say the same things you have. Now, we appreciate you as a spokesperson, but think about how that feels. It's really sending the wrong message from DEQ
And
senior
I'm
staff.
sorry they're tied up right now. And I
How
wish
tied up can it be to not come down for
Just
5
like this,
minutes?
whenever the governor came out with his executive order 80, we said, listen, 3 hours, we sat 3 hours. We came for a meeting for 3 hours, thinking the governor would be there to listen. He walks in, does his little speech, not no disrespect to him. He does his little speech before anybody gets a chance to get up and speak about the pipeline and what the causes and the dangers are of the pipeline. He gets up and leaves. Secretary Regan stayed and listened, but the governor didn't even have we had respect to sit there politely and listen to him. We waited and waited and listened to him, and then he gets up and walks out.
You know the
before
meeting he's talking about?
And I'm sorry y'all feel that way. I really would like to set
Is that
something
how
up
our
so we
government
can have a
works?
dialogue. I'd love to set
We would
something
like
up.
a meeting with the governor. I will come back here for a meeting with the governor.
Well, and
But
I-
since the governor
and
sounds
respectfully,
like
I
he's
don't
in
think
control
the
of
governor-
this, since the governor talks to CEO Farrell and CEO Lynn Good, and we've repeatedly asked, and I know this isn't your responsibility, we have repeatedly asked for meetings with the governor. And the governor, so far as we know, and I've checked this out a little bit as best I can, none of the environmental groups in North Carolina have met with the governor. Why is that? He'll meet with an out-of-state person like Tom Farrell. He'll meet, now maybe Sierra Club, maybe National Resources.
I don't think that's right.
Well,
The
maybe some of the big
governor's very
greens.
engaged in
Maybe.
environmental issues.
But how many people along the pipeline route have had a meeting with? The pipeline's 900 feet from his house. We have other people who have asked for meetings who live along the pipeline route. Marvin Winstead in Nash County. The pipeline goes right through his 100 acres. It's going to destroy his property, destroy the value of his property. Will Governor Cooper meet with him? No. So we have that's.
Frustration. I
Well,
wish I could
we're
fix
very
these
The
things
governor more or
today.
less threw the DEQ under the bus, saying that it was the DEQ that did all this.
I understand the frustration. I would love to set up something, but I can't do it impromptu, and I'm sorry I can't make that happen right this moment. I'd like to give you my card so we can stay in touch.
Would it matter if we
Is that
had a
okay?
$57.8 million
I'll
deal?
take your card, but
Yes, sir.
No,
I
no
know,
disrespect.
I've seen
It's
you
just
many times.
ridiculous. It's
And I'm
ridiculous.
sorry I can't do more for you right this moment. I'm sorry we can't set up a meeting
But
right this
if
second.
Tom Farrell walked in here right now, we could go upstairs. I guarantee that would work. But yes, it would.
Sir, I don't think we really don't have a lot of drive-by minutes, I'll be honest. It's hard to park at Green Square.
Well, you can
But-
probably tell, a lot of our concerns don't necessarily have to do with process. So I'm thinking as we came here to deliver a message today, if there might be messages that we could ask you to pass on to Secretary Regan.
Absolutely, and I have your leave behinds that you gave me, and I appreciate you bringing stuff on paper. It's really hard for us to do impromptu stuff, but please stay in touch. Please reach out to me. Let me see what I
When
can
are
do
we
to try
going to
to
see
help.
some action from our meetings? We haven't seen any actions from our past meetings. We get a lot of, I'm sorry, but you know what? That tree that's laying out there in the field, you can say I'm sorry till the day you die, and I die. But that tree's never going to be put back again. DEQ, by allowing this permit to stay where it's at instead of revoking it, is allowing stuff like that to go on. And every day that they take a step forward, that's one step out of our lives that we will never be able to get back. So what I'm trying to say is, it's time for the meetings to be over with. It's time for some actions to be taken instead of us getting thrown out of buildings and trying to
Oh, and
tell
we're
you
not
what's
throwing you
going
out of the
on. I'm
building.
just saying.
I do need you to slide just a little bit away from the door so folks
what
can
I'm
get in.
trying
I don't want the
to say
officer to have
is
to
that
be side.
it's time for Dominion to start getting some slaps on their hand. Meetings is like wasted words.
Well, I'm trying to address your concern that you haven't had it, you don't feel like you've been heard. And the best way I know to do that is to get you folks to talk to so your voice can be heard. And like I said, I apologize, I can't do it right this
Can you have
moment.
some action from those meetings?
I'm going to try to see what we can do to get y'all connected again. I know you met with Secretary Regan before. I apologize that I need to go now. I have
Do you have children?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, if you tell your child, you keep doing that, you're going to get spanked on your hand, right? What do you do if that child keeps
Sir,
doing
I
it?
am so sorry, and I wish I could set up a meeting for you right now. I really do, and unfortunately, I just can't make that happen. I do have your leave behind. Is there anything else you'd like me to take to the secretary?
yes,
You want
we
me to
would.
take
We will meet with Governor Reagan. We would like
Secretary.
Secretary Reagan to go to the governor and say, we've got some very angry citizens here who now are going to go outside the legitimate channels, and if you will not meet with us, we will figure out what those non-legitimate channels are to keep raising this issue more loudly, more colorfully, maybe with more fun, but in a way that may embarrass the governor and embarrass Secretary Reagan more than they have been in the past.
And like I said, I want to keep the dialogue open. I would like to talk to y'all. Let me see what I can do. Shoot me a note. Let's try to figure out a schedule so we can sit there.
Data sheet mean anything whenever a company, their MSDS sheets, you get that. Does DEQ pay no attention to that? Like if you get something saying, this is harmful, according to the manufacturer, this contains chemicals that cause cancer, growth effects.
Well, yes, sir. You've seen it in methyl bromide where we worked hard on those things.
What y'all do?
We're a regulator, we're a permitter. There are a lot of things we do.
Yeah, okay, you said the keyword, you're a permit. So do you still permit give them the permits to put stuff
We have
like
to
that in
follow the law and we have to follow the
But I thought
science.
DEQ is supposed to protect, you're sort of supposed to safeguard things like that happening.
We have to follow the science and we have to follow the law.
Well, whenever the manufacturer says it causes these things, you're still allowed to be.
This is not a simple answer, and there's a lot of complexity around the issue, particularly once the federal government has authorized the
But what
pipeline.
guarantees
And
that's
I'm
why
glad
y'all are trying to
to
figure
chat
that
with
out,
y'all.
that ACP
I would
is
like to
stopped.
get my experts with you, so you can have a talk. And I would love to set up a meeting, and I apologize that I need to go now.
People in power always say, when a group comes and says something needs to change, they'll say, oh, it's too complicated, you can't understand it.
No, sir,
it's
I'm
so
not asserting
complicated,
that at
we
all.
can't do anything.
I'm
This
not
is very
asserting
clear.
that, I'm not asserting at all that it's too complicated for you to understand. That
Well,
is
you
not
use
my
the word
intent.
complication.
It is, and I'd like you to talk to people who are smarter than me about this.
Well, I don't, we want to make sure that something is going to be done to change this.
Well,
At a
and-
minimum, suspend the permit.
Well,
But
and
we
I
really
can't do
need a
that until
vote.
we sit down together and standing in the lobby and in a
We
impromptu moment.
have
I
sat
can't-
down with you folks.
Well, can
Well,
you-
and I'm sorry it
We
feels
will
that
sit
way,
down
but I
and
would
have a-
like to try and set up something for you. I apologize, I have to go. I will say the officer is required to make sure the doors are clear, so just slide a little bit that way. It'll probably be a little bit warmer too. And y'all are welcome to be here. I know that technically the rules say that you have to be outside, but it's just too cold. I can't have y'all out there. I don't want you to get sick.
I'm gonna take over right now from her.
That's called
But I
environmental
will-
protection.
But as long as y'all just kind of stay away from the door so folks can get in, we'll be fine.
Pipeline's gonna make us a lot sicker.
I apologize, I have to go. Thank you. Yes, there you go, if you need them. Feel free.
Guys, listen.
Thank you.
Stay
Thank you
in the
for your
building. Stay warm. Okay. They're letting me stay in here. I know exactly what you guys are trying to get through. Does anybody, before I put these away, does anybody want her car?
I have one.
Do anybody else want her car? I would just have it, because if you want to reach out to her, does anybody want this? All right. Did you want that going upstairs to the Secretary Reagan, or you want to hold on to that?
He's got many of them.
Okay, so he doesn't have any of that. All right, this guy's listening.
That's why we're here, because he's got some pictures, but we don't see any action from him.
I understand, and I understand your fight. I did your fight. I understand it. But you understand that this is a government facility. I understand your voice wants to be heard. As long as you guys follow within the regulations, we're going to be good. Okay? We can't block the entrance. We can't impede governmental facilities. As long as you guys are doing
You
that.
know what, that brings up a good point. You say you've got regulations, you can't do this, can't do that. If you own a piece of property and you put up a no trespassing sign, and people come on that property, you could have them arrested.
Correct.
Okay. With the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, you've got no trespassing sign plastered all over the place. They walk out there, they stick their sticks up, they tell you to get off, they're going to do this, they're going to do that.
I understand.
And then they come back there several months later and put up a little red sign that says Atlantic Coast Pipeline.
And
no
that's why I
trespassing. And then
respect-
you get a letter from them telling you that if you go over there again, you will be arrested.
Right,
for charge of
and as a citizen,
You got that,
off of when I'm not in duty,
So how-
I
how does
understand.
the law
And like
work
I
like
said, I would be fighting the same issues that you guys are fighting. That's why your voice needs to be heard. That's why you guys have the regulations to protest.
It's
Okay?
hard- it's hard
It
to
is your
understand how
right.
law
Listen,
has
guys,
two
it is your
sides.
right to protest this and to let your voice be heard. You see what I'm saying? I understand, and you guys have a permit to do that downtown today. Am I correct?
We don't, but the group.
Are you guys
does, yes.
joining that group?
We're going to support them.
Okay.
But we're completely separate from them.
Okay, you're separate from them?
We know them personally. But we represent several environmental organizations in North Carolina.
I understand.
So we're not part of Triangle Speakers Bar.
I understand. And trust me, I know you're done talking and you're done not being heard, but there's a process to everything. And honestly, I think you might get, in my opinion, like I
We
said,
have followed the process until we have put it in
more if you
place.
get a face-to-face.
The process does not work. That's very clear to
Ms.
all of us.
Kay,
We would not be
myself,
here.
has sat right there in that room, face to face with Secretary Reagan. Haven't got any
we
Two or three times, right?
Okay, well, that's the first step.
Well, the thing is, it's been the first and second and 12th and, 100th step. And I hope you can understand the pain, the sense of betrayal from Governor Cooper, the sense of betrayal from Secretary Reagan, and to some extent, to the degree that staff at DEQ can take a stand. We hope that they will pay attention to this and challenge their...
That's what your legal right to protest is going to bring to light. And the news will be, and it brings everything to light, guys. I understand.
Just been diagnosed with breast cancer over a year ago. She's older. She's in remission. So when this came out, we live on the family farm. I dreamed of living on all my life. My grandfather went through, excuse the expression, hell to keep it. And now my wife is looking at me and saying, if this is there, I already had cancer, I'm leaving. How would you feel if this is land that your family has had for generations?
Guys,
and
I
you
got
had
pumped
dreams
up
of
watching
your
the Aaron
family that
Brockovich
had
movie
generations
with the water
in the future. And now you got
It's the same thing.
It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing. And that's why you guys are doing your legal right and your democratic right to
People like this
protest.
don't listen.
It's a moral right too.
Exactly.
Moral duty.
And God bless you for being dressed up today and coming out in the cold and doing all this. But again, do what you need to do. I'm going to pass on whatever we can pass on to them, and then hopefully the more your voice will be heard and change will affect. But until then, though, I just need you guys cooperating with me and just not protecting or
Money
not
can't buy a
obstructing.
grandchild's smile.
And also, just keep your voices down if we can do that. Are we good?
We don't start chanting and saying,
Don't start
say, DEQ, Secretary Reagan.
And I'm going to have a microphone.
We prepared a very good chant.
Listen, restrooms are behind the elevators. I understand your plight, like I said, but
We understand all this. He was down there.
Yeah, he gets it. We get it. And like I said, you guys have a group going on today with a legal permit that we were going down to, assist, and we understand what you guys are doing. But just like you have, we're in a function today of a job to do, and we got to make sure the government facilities function.
We understand.
Okay,
Respect
so
that.
all right.
Well, we want it to function properly too, which means that it protects the people and the land of North Carolina, and they're not doing it. They are not doing that job. We want them to function properly.
Well, I'm going to do something else for you guys on my side. I'm just going to try to find out when their meetings are done today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Because
Thank you,
maybe
officer.
we're still holding out hope that one of them will have the
Come
courtesy,
down.
the
I know you guys just
professionalism, at the very least to come down and say, hey, and then continue walking upstairs. But I think symbolically, that would mean a lot to me personally, that after the staff meeting, that at the very least, they could do that.
I know.
So if you could pass that on, thank you.
This is Commissioner.
He's right. It is.
This is not Commissioner. Hey, Sherry.
So once again, for folks who might just be tuning in, this is NC APPPL, the North Carolina Alliance to Protect Our People and the Places We Live. We're live here in the lobby of the Department of Environmental Quality, where we've been kind of going round and round with some spokespeople here, and also Officer Priest, who is, as always, just exceptionally professional and very polite. Can't fault these folks for the warmth of their reception. They're always very hospitable, but our criticism, such as it is, isn't so much about the warmth that we're received with, but about the actions that they take. And are they looking out for the interests of North Carolinians? And clearly, with their permit for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, they are not. And so we're here to tell them to revoke that permit. So we'll go on here for a few more minutes probably before we wrap it up.
Thank you, Sheriff.
All right, so while we're just waiting again, can we talk a little bit about eminent domain? Just to, or, you know, flesh that out a little bit for people.
Great idea.
I mean, I think one of the backgrounds on that is FERC's Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, which I think we would claim is also a lie, is not truly representative of the community's needs and so forth. And that, on the other hand, is a linchpin for the eminent domain concern. Once they issue that certificate of convenience and necessity, officials are empowered through the companies and through the federal government to do whatever they need to secure the lands that they feel are part of the project. So that can include things like walking on and trespassing when other persons might not be able to do that, but also fine. One personal exposure to this of my own is that for many people, for the common landowner, I would expect that having proceedings of eminent domain taken against them must feel horrifying, coward, the type of thing that just doesn't happen in normal civil society, essentially a David versus Goliath type of situation, with Goliath being not only companies like Duke and Dominion, but also, frankly, the federal government, and as their servant, the state government to some extent. I'm aware of one case in Pennsylvania where a maple sugaring operation was disrupted through clearing of trees with federal agents carrying automatic weapons onto the property in order to protect or enable that tree cutting crew. To me, that is outlandish. That project is ultimately stopped at the moment, but the clearing happened despite incomplete permitting of the project in other jurisdictions. So, and now, hopefully, the likelihood of that project not going through, this is a Constitution pipeline, still will have resulted in the clearing and the disruption of that economic activity on the part of the family. So again, that's an example for me of the type of thing that is happening here routinely. Who would like to throw out some other comments on eminent domain and the injustice of that concept here? I'll just pull back in another concept we were talking about earlier, the likelihood or the likely ultimate purpose of the pipeline being to convey natural gas to the coasts so it can be liquefied for export abroad. For me, the idea that eminent domain and the idea of public necessity should be conflated with the enabling of that kind of project is immoral, unjust, illogical, and so forth. And again, the point that I'm trying to make is that these kind of eminent domain proceedings impact on local owners, and that is likely to translate simply into economic gain for the pipeline and gas companies through export of the gas to others, and ultimately to us being charged the same amount for that gas, under the fair marketing type of stipulations as people are currently paying abroad for liquefied natural gas. So, the prospect is not only of increased prices here, but of vastly increased prices, perhaps not up to a full magnitude, but certainly up to the magnitude of 5 or 6 times what we currently pay. So that's just sort of maybe a long-term future outlook, but I think it's a prospect that needs to be considered. And it just compounds the injustice of eminent domain being exercised here for projects like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on eminent domain or related?
Well, the economics of it, I think, is really important. And if you have electricity and you don't use gas, you might think, well, this isn't going to affect me, but that electricity is generated by, from frack gas and in some cases coal. But so just look at your electricity bill and multiply it by 2 or 3 and think that that's the future if we allow these kinds of infrastructure projects to be built. Now, there's also the issue of sea level rise, and the three places in the United States that are most at risk are Chesapeake Bay in Maryland and in D.C., Florida, and the Outer Banks. And what's going to happen when people start losing their property? If the government steps in to help, then our taxes will go up, and if they don't, then a lot of people are going to be facing tremendous losses on their own. And the final thing is that studies show that as climate change accelerates, and we're seeing that very directly, just this past year with 2 500-year storms in 1 year in North Carolina. But as those, as the destruction increases, scientists say that the southern part of the United States is going to be more at risk, and than the north. So we're going to be looking at people not only not moving here anymore, but starting to move away. And what's that going to do to our tax base? And so the fact that we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by allowing this project to go forward. I mean, simply on the basis of environmental issues, it shouldn't go forward. But then it makes no economic sense for the people and the businesses of North Carolina.
That's exactly right. We're at a point in time where environmental concerns and economic concerns, there's hardly any daylight between the two. The current cost for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, when they initially announced it, it was $5 billion. That's up to $7 billion now. North Carolina's portion of that is going to be in the $3 billion range. Here's something that is really outlandish. Not only will they recoup all that cost through add-ons to our electric bills, the federal government allows companies like Dominion and Duke to recoup 14% over and above their costs. So for these companies, they have every incentive to misrepresent these projects, to talk about a market for this gas that doesn't exist except overseas, which they do not own up to. They have every incentive to build big infrastructure projects like this, because for them, this beats going to the bank and opening up an account. There's no bank that we can take our money to where we can get 14% interest. But if you are Duke or Dominion, you've got a guaranteed route to 14% returns, which is it's outlandish. It's outrageous. And so
15% of $3 billion is what, $400 million. So they make $400 million on their profit above the cost of the pipeline.
That's right, and so that's money that every working person in North Carolina, as well as Virginia and West Virginia, are going to be at one point asked to pay for.
I heard a comment at a conference at Duke where a former state official said, it suddenly occurred to me after looking at everything going on, utilities are not providing power; they're actually construction companies, and.
Yeah.
If a CEO wants a $2,000 desk versus a $500 desk, they'll order the $2,000 desk because they can make 14% off of your $2,000, which is a lot better than 14% off of their $500.
And in South Carolina, where a nuclear power plant was being built, and it had to be abandoned after they had spent, I think, $14 to $15 billion to build this thing, and the VIPs of South Carolina Electric and Gas had made fortunes, tens of millions of dollars in salary and stock benefits. The thing was abandoned, and then guess what? Who's going to pay that $15 billion? Eventually the taxpayers of South Carolina, who can ill afford something of that scale. It's outrageous.
In addition to all these economic issues, there's also the environmental justice issues. DEQ approved the pipeline and said there would be no disproportionate impact on African American and indigenous and communities of color, and that's flat out wrong. The compressor station is going into Northampton County, which is 58% African American, and that's the only compressor station at this point. But if it continues into South Carolina, there will be additional compressor stations, most likely in Robeson County, which is the most diverse county in the state and has the highest proportion of indigenous people in the state. And the pipeline currently dead ends right there. And there are communities of color all along the pipeline that are completely disproportionate to the rest of the state. It's an area of low incomes and communities of color that are being selectively hit by this because they don't have the political power of some of the wealthier counties. And DEQ did an environmental justice analysis that was based on bad statistics and techniques that were forced to show that there was no disproportionate impact when that's not true. They compared the areas next to the pipeline to the rest of the county without looking at the fact that that county is already disproportionately impacted compared to the rest of the state. So it's a built-in system that allows them to say there's no impact when there is. And so in terms of the climate, this is a disaster. In terms of North Carolina's waterways, the rivers, the wetlands, the swamps, the creeks, the streams, the hundreds and hundreds of waterways that get crossed and are likely to be damaged. And in terms of the environmental justice, all those are totally destroyed by this pipeline. So we've got to stop having discussions about it and start shutting it down. This is the time for DEQ to revoke the permit or suspend the permit and look at the facts and look at them fairly and honestly instead of just saying, we'll have a meeting with you. That's not enough at this point. The facts are out there and they're ignoring them.
One other thing in regard to indigenous people, news reports this week, and we know they're reliable, shows how Dominion, through this other corporation, offered indigenous tribes $1 million each if they would keep silent about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the permitting of the pipeline. So Dominion has used its incredible wealth and power, and it can turn around and charge its ratepayers for the $1 million that it's going to give to these tribes. So it offered these tribes $1 million each. And these are poor tribes. These are not wealthy people for whom, and so $1 million could mean a lot to economic development within those tribes. So it's very, very hard for the leaders of indigenous communities to refuse that kind of money. But that's how Dominion and Duke and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline have brought public silence and public apathy about the permitting of this pipeline. And DEQ needs to look into that. It has a lot to do with how this whole thing got
maybe the Attorney General should be looking into that. And also, where does that $1 million payoff come from? Our pockets.
Our pockets, exactly.
Yeah, I would add that that is something that DEQ must look into in light of new information that has come out that Steve just shared about the bribe to these indigenous nations. It's an assault on their sovereignty for these indigenous peoples. It's an extension of genocide, and I'm so grateful that now the news has come out about the disgusting tactics of Duke and Dominion with the most vulnerable populations in eastern North Carolina. So we're insisting that DEQ and the governor really take a look at this and revoke the permit. Start the process again in light of so much compelling new evidence.
It's hard to understand how the governor and the DEQ both have taken stands against offshore drilling in the Mountain Valley Pipeline, but in the same breath, they both more or less give their approval for Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which would be more harmful than others. That's the part that's hard to understand, because the very facts they use to take a stand against the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the offshore drilling, which I'm very thankful for, is the same facts that we're here today trying to get them to understand about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Where is the break in understanding?
If I thought it would do any good, I would just stay here indefinitely. You know, at some point we've got to come and just sit in indefinitely until something changes. It's very clear that that their feet are stuck in concrete, the concrete of the fossil fuel industry, and their addiction to both fossil fuels and probably, even though it's not illegal, addiction to the money that Duke and other corporations throw around in order to sway the governor and other public officials, not necessarily through bribery, but through campaign contributions and other kinds of things, and to their bribing of Native American tribes, to the enormous amounts of money. And I don't know that anybody has ever done a calculation about the amount of money that Dominion and Duke give to community groups and libraries and schools and universities. Duke, apparently, from what NC has been able to calculate, has a public relations budget of, guess how much? $80 million a year. $80 million a year to keep us quiet, or even to generate support for their projects. $80 million goes a long way in North Carolina to persuading people to be silent or to even take a stand favorable. That's the amount of money they've got to throw around. And how much money do we in this group have to throw around? Apple has probably, in its whole history of the last couple of years, spent, what, $20,000 in all, but for various activities. There's no way we can compete with that kind of money. If we had that kind of money, we'd win this struggle hands down, but we don't have it. We don't have access to it.
But we're going to win anyway.
We're going to win. Thank you, John.
Trump's probably wanting $7 billion for the wall.
Yeah, really.
The Indians will put $7 billion in the ground.
That's really.
And the country's going to feel about that, but they're closing their eyes to the $7 billion going in the ground.
Well, we're not closing our eyes.
No.
And it's true. There's a lot of opposition in the pipeline. It's not that we are alone.
And not saying that the whole wait for the storm to go by.
Also, all the issues we've been talking about are impact on North Carolina. We can't ignore the fact that fracking in West Virginia is devastating communities. I've visited communities there. I've talked to the people who have pipeline or have fracking going on in their neighborhoods and in their property. It's absolutely devastating to West Virginia and the communities there. It's a state that's been impacted by the coal industry, and now the methane industry is moving in and taking over as the coal disappears. And we're sacrificing the communities in West Virginia to supply the gas, the methane gas, for this pipeline. And so North Carolina is where I was born. North Carolina is where I've lived my whole life. But I also care about the other states and the people that are being impacted by this pipeline that are outside North Carolina. This is a global issue. North Carolina is our focus because we're talking to DEQ. But this is a global issue. The climate is affecting everyone. And the fracking is impacting communities in Pennsylvania and Ohio and West Virginia for this pipeline. And it destroys communities. It just tears them apart.
That's right.
It also creates toxic potentials that I'm not sure we understand yet, and that which may rear their heads, as our children are growing up and trying to remain in those communities. The kinds of chemicals that are put into ground, thousands of gallons, thousands of pounds of carcinogens, hormone disruptors.
And a lot of them are still secret.
Right.
We don't know everything, but the ones we do know are terrible. They're carcinogenic. They pollute the groundwater. They're long-term pollutants.
It's such a violent attack against Mother Nature. We're actually such force. We're forcing these incredible chemicals. We're smashing rocks up on the earth. And look at the alternative. That sun coming down fresh every single day. The wind blowing free. Instead of billions of dollars, we could be taking this stuff in. If we are, we're going to be doing a lot more of it. and let's accelerate towards that.
I think it's also important, we've been talking about what feels like powerlessness in relation to Governor Cooper and DEQ and an inability kind of to move them to revoke the permits on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. But what is going on all over the world is massive public resistance to all kinds of fossil fuel infrastructure. Right now in British Columbia, there are native people standing up to a frack gas pipeline, which I think is coming out of Alberta, although I'm not sure where, but going through Native American territory. Kay might be able to speak more to this than I know, but it's a really important struggle. The Canadian government has sent in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, this iconic police force that Canada supposedly has, to arrest the Native Americans who resist.
Not just arrest, but it's a brutal attack on the people who have been opposing it.
But
on their own land, on their tribal land.
At the same time, people are standing up in Louisiana. There's been a struggle over the Bayou Bridge pipeline with multiple arrests and so on in the bayous of Louisiana. In Massachusetts, the New England Direct Pipeline was defeated because of public opposition and pressure and so on. And we have had significant success in the courts. And while it's legal action which has stopped the construction of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, at least temporarily, and of the Mountain Valley Pipeline and so on, it's been court actions that have done it. It has been grassroots public pressure, like what we're doing right here today, and in other places as well, all up and down the routes of these pipelines and around the country too, and at Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington and elsewhere, that has got the attention of the courts. And God bless the Fourth Circuit Court in Washington, who in their most recent decision about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline said that the Lorax, that the trees can't speak for themselves, and that the court has got to operate as the Lorax who can speak for the trees. And so, in that sense, we are making enormous progress. Now, is it enough progress? Clearly not, because climate change is an emergency. And according to the IPCC and other reports, government reports and UN reports, we've only got 10 or 12 years to turn this thing around, or the catastrophic climate change is going to overtake us. What is happening, the protests that's happening, and the court actions and so on, and the regulators who, and Governor Hogan in Maryland, who have changed their minds on this stuff, that is not sufficient, but it's still enormously important, and we can build on it. So, Kay, do you want to talk any more about what's going on in British Columbia?
Well, just that what's going on there is not unlike what's going on in indigenous sovereign lands around the world, where Canadian police, the Canadian government moved in. The nation there, that particular indigenous nation, challenged the government. They said, we will not move from our ancestral land. They took a stand. There was a really rather brutal confrontation, not unlike what happened at Standing Rock, and there were several arrests. But it's just heartbreaking to know that original peoples in Canada and in the U.S. and around the world have to face this kind of terror, and it really is terror. I think where there are sparks of hope in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and I think in the growing consciousness worldwide about the real peril, the crisis, the climate crisis that we're in. I was really heartened to see that with this particular action of resistance up in Canada with these native peoples, that there were cities around the world that stood up, communities around the world that stood up in support of the resistance that this indigenous nation took against the Canadian government. So I think the consciousness is growing. I think there's hope, but I think that the sense of urgency and crisis is really imminent, because 10 to 15 years, it's now is a critical, irreparable time, really.
So So I want to have a little conversation without the camera.
Okay. So our group's huddling up here, and once again, if you're perhaps just joining us, this is Greg Yost here with the North Carolina Alliance to Protect Our People and the Places We Live. We're in Raleigh this morning at the Department of Environmental Quality headquarters. We have come in without a, as we have talked back and forth with the staff here, it was impromptu. We've come in without an appointment, but our message is we have met with you guys and we've met with the governor's staff so many times about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and while you are always very polite, you are making colossal mistakes for the state of North Carolina, and we are here to tell the DEQ that the permit that they issued about this time last year needs to be pulled. We're in a lull right now in pipeline construction in all 3 states, from West Virginia all the way to North Carolina, because of some action at the Fourth Circuit Court level in Virginia. Construction's been stopped and been paused for right now. This is the time that North Carolina needs to declare a moratorium on any further construction until the state has a chance to really look at what its energy needs are and to decide that our energy future isn't going to be driven by profit decisions of a corporation, especially one as powerful and as corrupt as Duke Energy. So we're hoping to speak to Secretary Regan here at DEQ. Whether that's going to be possible or not, don't know. But that's where we are right now. We'll see how much longer we're going to hold out today. A little later on in the afternoon, if you're in the Raleigh area and want to join us in front of the Legislative Building, the Triangle People Power group of Raleigh, it's a group of high school students, has organized a rally about a rally and lobby day about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and about new energy future for North Carolina, and also looking at issues like coal ash. That's going to take place this afternoon. So if you're local to the area and can make it, we hope you can come out and join us.
They're too long. I think that's a really important discussion. We'll figure it out. We got over I'm not in
They can't hear.
The one thing that we might do here with this offer, not today, but to get a meeting with Secretary Reagan and not use that. I'm not talking about being violent, I'm not talking about using violence, but I am talking about really pushing the envelope beyond where we pushed it before, because in the past, and I haven't had these meetings, but I think you guys sort of had a dialogue with them, right? Yeah. Dialogues aren't working. I mean, what might work is putting a little bit of emotion and anger and something into that conversation so that it's not just Yeah, that happens.
Relative to today, I think I propose that we at least do some chanting. Let the police come and confront us. Let it go on, and we continue. We at least do that. That's my suggestion. And I guess I feel more comfortable about that than rushing the other way. That I'm hesitant to personally, but that's just what it's.
Turn it off. You can't hear.
Any other proposals for what to do?
So as we finish up here in the lobby of DEQ, any last statements or observations from participants?
We're in a crisis right now. DEQ refuses to treat it as a crisis, and that's why we're here.
Thank you, John.
It was very clear from what happened this morning with this gracious and polite representative of DEQ did talk to us for what, half an hour or 45 minutes or something, that we are meeting a roadblock. We are meeting a brick wall that they say, well, we'll listen. Maybe the brick wall has a couple of ears somewhere, but those ears are not connected to the brain of DEQ. They are, that connection has been severed because DEQ feels like its hands are tied for whatever reason, because of Dominion and Duke money, because of Governor Cooper, or whatever. But we have hit a brick wall, and we need to find a way, non-violently, to smash that brick wall. What that is, we don't know yet, but we are looking for that, and we will find it, because this thing must be stopped.
Well, I have one. All of us, of course, are climate folks that are, that have been really active on this front, and I suspect most of you watching are also pretty active on this front. What each one of us has to do is pull in 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 100 folks to join us. It's our responsibility to get across to a lot more people that we need reinforcements, because there are things happening now that already are hurting us, and are going to be hurting us and our children and grandchildren.
Put in a pitch for Al Gore's thing in Atlanta.
Yeah, climate reality training is happening in Atlanta. All you folks in North Carolina and the whole Southeast, and really anywhere. It's a 3 or 4 day training at the end of March, and maybe the middle. Check it out. Just go Climate Reality Training Atlanta. You'll not only get some incredible information from Al Gore and all the scientists and the folks he brings in to help us get the climate message across, but you'll also meet a lot of folks in the southeastern part of the country, and we got to start strategizing and really work hard to make sure that we stop these incredible mistakes that are going on right now.
Good.
DEQ, hear our voice.
Revoke the ACP.
DEQ,
hear our voice. Revoke the ACP. DEQ, hear our voice. Revoke the ACP. DEQ, hear our voice. Revoke the ACP. DEQ, hear our voice. Revoke the ACP. DEQ, hear our voice. Revoke the ACP. DEQ. Hear our voice. Revoke the ACP.
And so that's it here in Raleigh, the Department of Environmental Quality, as we end up our live stream. We've got some people in here chanting, and we're not going to stop until our message gets through. This is Greg Yost for NC Apple. Thanks, and hope you'll join us next time.